This is all that is. All that is all that is. This is a concept that's part of the entire non-duality culture and phenomenon. But what does it mean? Does it mean anything? Does it have any meaning? Does it have any practical value? So I thought I would make a few remarks about that. And I actually started, I have watched videos about it, of course, but I started thinking I would ask Google's AI about this. And so the answer I got is this. The phrase, "this is all that is in non-duality, points to the core understanding that reality is a single, unified, and complete whole, without any fundamental separation between things. There is no outside or other to the present singular reality." And so from this perspective, we can say that, as I've talked about several times before, that most people are in what I call the consciousness of separation, the illusion that we're separate beings. We are separated from the environment in which we're in, we're separated from other people, but we're also separated from our source, however we define that. So we can say that all that is all that is a challenge to this state of mind to see that everything is in actuality one complete whole. But some non-dual teachers also talk about that this is not an understanding, this is more of an experience. So in other words, you can have an experience where you're stepping outside of your normal sense of separation, but also your normal sense of time, past, present, and future. You're just in the now, experiencing the now. You're just experiencing everything that is there, and you realize this is all there is. There is just that one reality. And the question is, though, how helpful is this idea to people who are still in this mindset that they're separate beings? Does it actually help them, or does it actually confuse them? Because I can think back to myself, if you had told me this 20, 30 years ago, I would have reasoned, based on my state of mind that I had back then, which was affected by duality, that it means that you're supposed to just witness what's happening and not have any thoughts or judgments about it. And you see some of these non-dual teachers that are talking about this. So let's say this. Normally, in our normal state of consciousness, we experience everything as separate. We are separated from everything. We are a separate being. You can step outside of that experience. I've talked about many times, there's a part of our minds that I call the conscious you. We can step outside of the outer mind. And you can experience that there's an alternative to seeing everything as separate. You can actually experience everything as part of that one underlying whole. But the problem is, in the beginning, when you have these experiences, they only last for a certain time. Then you go back into this consciousness of seeing yourself as a separate being using what I call the duality consciousness. So now you have your normal state of mind where you are evaluating, judging, labeling everything. You have an experience of stepping outside of that. Now you come back into your normal state of mind, but the experience was such a contrast that you can't just ignore it. But now you have to try and understand it or explain it within the worldview you have as a separate being. I mean, I'm not trying to blame anybody, there's nothing else we can do. I'm just saying, there is a danger there that you can label this experience of really something beyond duality, you can label it by using the duality consciousness. And if you now think this is the only way to describe it, you can be tied or trapped in that labeling of the experience. Whereas the alternative is, you don't label it. You seek to have more experiences so that there comes a point where the experience, it doesn't really need to be interpreted or labeled anymore. And what I think is the easiest way perhaps to describe this is this idea again that we need to look at, if we really want to be non-dual or really want to grasp what non-duality is about, we need to look at the duality consciousness. Because as I've said, we have two basic states of mind we can be in. We can see ourselves as connected beings that are connected to something outside our own minds. We can see ourselves as separate beings. And the underlying reality is, as many non-dual teachers point out, many other spiritual teachers have pointed out throughout the ages, everything is connected. Everything is one underlying reality. But is that how those who follow the non-dual teachers see it? Or is it, for that matter, that how the non-dual teachers actually see it? Because you have this saying, I know I've referred to it again and again, only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion. As I've said before, this is a dualistic statement. You're now creating an artificial division between Brahman and the world. And you're saying, again, Brahman is undifferentiated, that's real. The world is differentiated, and any differentiation is duality, and that's not real. And as I've said several times, this is not correct. Differentiation is not the same as duality. Duality is a specific state of consciousness. In other words, God or Brahman or the Creator did not create duality when it created the world. Duality is a state of mind we go into when we choose to leave the sense that we're connected beings and go into the illusion that we're separate beings. Because, as I say, the reality is that all life is, it's not that all life is one, it's an expression of the one mind of the Creator. Therefore, everything is connected. And in order to deny that underlying oneness, we have to go into this state of mind. Let's put it this way. Everything is created out of God's being. Therefore, you cannot be separated from the whole. You can only have an experience that you're separated from the whole, but that experience only takes place in your mind. It has no effect on the whole. It doesn't change reality. It only changes your perception. So, my point is, when you're in duality, you see everything in terms of opposites. There's good and bad, right and wrong, capitalism, communism, Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, this and that. And as I also said, you have an inherent insecurity when you see yourself as a separate being, because there's always an opposite. Oh. You may call yourself a communist, but you are challenged by the capitalist. You may call yourself a Christian and say Christianity is the only true religion, but you're challenged by everybody who's not Christian. So you are constantly suffering because you're threatened. And in order to overcome that, you can't really overcome the insecurity, but in order to make it livable, you are taking one dualistic polarity, raising it up to be the extreme. And you are applying, as I said, a value judgment to everything. This is the highest. Everything else is lower. This is real. Everything else is unreal. This is right. Everything else is wrong. So, now you come across a non-dual teaching. Perhaps you even have the experience that you step outside of that dualistic perception filter and you're just experiencing the world. If you look throughout the ages, many mystics have had an experience that they describe as the silent witness. I've had those experiences since I was a child. I know many other people who've had them, often without doing anything for it, spontaneously. But I also know many people who achieved this during meditation or the practice of other spiritual practices. So it's not an uncommon experience. Okay, so the silent witness, what is that? Well, as I explain it in many of my videos, we have the outer mind. The highest level of the mind is our sense of identity. Then there's the mental level where our thoughts and beliefs are, the emotional level where our feelings are, and then there's an aspect of the mind that's tied to the brain, the physical brain. So this is the outer personality. But the core of our being is what I call the conscious you. And what I always explain is it's pure awareness or neutral awareness. Meaning, in the outer mind, we have all of these opinions, beliefs, reactionary patterns, traumas. I call them separate selves or subconscious selves. But that's, again, just a name. But the fact is, the dualistic aspect, the dualistic worldview, is anchored in the outer personality, the identity, mental, emotional. It's like putting on glasses that color everything. And the conscious you has created the outer personality over many lifetimes, but it hasn't become it. You have not become your personality. Your personality is, so to speak, something you've taken on in order to have a certain experience here on earth, including the experience that you are a separate being, and that you can do whatever you want to do without considering the consequences for others. So it's very possible for the conscious you to step outside the outer mind and just experience itself as pure awareness. And this is the essence, we could say the purest form of mystical experience. You're just experiencing that. Instead of seeing everything through this filter where you have a label and everything, oh, this is right and wrong, this is not good, this is not good, I don't like this particular politician, people should really all be on this particular diet, everybody should follow my guru. You have all these judgments, all these opinions, all these labels. But when you step outside of all that, you're just a silent witness. It's like there's no filter. You don't need to judge and evaluate everything. You're either just in pure awareness where there's no particular contents of your awareness, or you are the silent witness who is witnessing the world, but you're free of the judgments, the labels, right? So the trouble is, if you glimpse that experience of neutral awareness, and then go back into your normal state of mind, your ego, which is the essence of your separate sense of self, is going to feel threatened, because in a sense it senses that this experience can help you become free of the ego. So what it does is it wants to superimpose its dualistic interpretation on the experience. And one way it can do this is by saying, yeah, now you've experienced there's only one underlying reality. Everything is connected. And there is no reason to judge anything. So therefore, you should strive to be in a state of mind where you have no opinions, no judgments, you're not differentiating, you're not evaluating anything. There's no right or wrong. Nothing really matters. Because all of this in the world is just unreality. It's just illusion. The world is an illusion. And you just need to get away from the world. The world is differentiated, therefore it's dualistic. So the way to be non-dual is to get away from the world and all evaluation of anything in the world. And this sounds very logical, completely rational to the outer mind. I remember back in, I think even in the 1990s, I was starting to sense this. There was something beyond my normal perception of life. I'd had the experiences already, but I was starting to grasp more what it was. But I was still, for years and years, I was still in this, but there's got to be something that's true. And what I meant with that is, there's got to be some way of looking at life, some worldview, some spiritual teaching that's true. It's got to be something that you can say, this is true and this other thing is wrong. And I see many other people who feel that way. They're saying, my guru, my non-dual teaching, that's right. The way this is expressed in words, that's right. because the ego clings to that. It's very, very challenging to look beyond all of these labels. But the other thing is that we can actually have an intuitive sense that there is something that's real, something that's valid. But we just don't know what it is. We can't, with our outer minds, we can't wrap our minds around it. And that's what I'm describing. I was in that state for years, I mean, more than 10 years. And the way to resolve that was, for me, I can only describe what I went through. But what started happening to me is that I started focusing on this duality, the duality consciousness. And I sensed intuitively, I need to grasp what this is. I need to really grasp what this means. And the more I studied it, the more I realized this. It colors the way we look at everything. There's always got to be the two opposites. And so what I realized at a certain point is that you can be in one extreme. Let me back up a little bit. I started realizing, in duality, you are trying to define that this is the truth. This particular teaching, for example. Let's say a non-dual teaching. So here I have a non-dual teacher who is known, who's been teaching for many years, he's written books, he's considered to have reached a higher state of consciousness. So you're coming as a student and you're accepting him as your guru and you're saying, this is true what he's saying. But after some time, what can happen is, what will happen to many people that I've met over the years on the spiritual path is, you begin to have certain questions. It's not necessarily that you doubt that the teaching is true, you're not necessarily thinking the teacher is lying to you, but you're just realizing there are some questions you have that the teacher and the teaching are not answering. And the question is how you deal with that. And what I realized was that in the duality consciousness, there are always two opposites. This means what? This means you can validate, seemingly, in your mind, you can validate any belief you want to have. So let's take the fundamentalist Christians. The Bible is the Word of God. This is their fundamental belief. And they have now, when they accept this belief, they put on a perception filter that says, any statement that validates that the Bible is the Word of God and that what it says in the Bible is the absolute truth, they accept. But any statement that questions that view, they reject. This is of the devil. Oh, the ultimate way to reject something for them is, this is of the devil. We're not even going to look at it. So this is the one feature of duality. It can validate anything you want to believe. It's what I call plausible plausibility. Anything can be validated. But then I started realizing the opposite is also the case. Because in the duality consciousness, there's always the two opposites. So anything can be doubted. Anything can be denied. And that's what I call plausible deniability. So in other words, the atheists who are against all form of religion, they have created another perception filter that says anything that seems to validate religion, we can reject. That's just superstition. That's nonsense. That's people who are not so smart as we are, that believe in this kind of stuff. So I started realizing this, that in the duality consciousness, you can define a truth, but there is really no truth in it. You know, whatever you define in duality is just the result of your perception filter where you are selective. You are accepting certain things and not accepting certain other things. You are very selective in what you allow to pass through the filter to your conscious mind. So what I started realizing is that the duality consciousness, it's like it's a perception filter that colors the way you look at everything, but it's at the subconscious level, so you don't realize it. And so what I realized was, here you might have some ideas that are coming to you that are actually valid ideas. But those ideas, in order to reach your conscious mind, they have to go through your subconscious mind. And in your subconscious mind, they are filtered. So If your perception filter is that of a fundamentalist Christian, then the valid ideas that, for example, say the earth is not the center of the universe, they're just filtered out. You either don't even acknowledge them or you don't see them as real or valid. And the same way, there can be ideas that are coming to you that are not actually in accordance with reality, but because they validate your basic idea of life, they come through. And this is what your conscious mind sees. It filters out certain things. You don't even see them. You don't even see them. And then there are other things that are so colored that you reject them, even if they reach your conscious mind. So this is what I started realizing. And this really hit me at some point, that I didn't want to live that way anymore. I didn't want to be in that state of mind. And so I started really contemplating this, and this took me, again, years and years to really deal with it. But what I eventually came to realize is that in duality, you are constantly judging and evaluating everything based on a relative standard that's created in the duality consciousness. In other words, it's not an absolute standard. It's not, is it real or unreal? It's totally relative to whatever you have decided to say, this has to be the truth. And I just realized I don't want to live my life based on that. I've got to find something that isn't relative. And of course, the experiences I had had all of my life of this stepping outside and experiencing the world, or experiencing myself from the outside, experiencing myself as pure awareness, I realized that is something absolute. You know, it is something that isn't relative. In other words, you could say it this way. When I'm in the separate mind, looking out through this dualistic perception filter, this is what I started realizing. Everything I see here is colored. It doesn't mean it's completely wrong. I mean, you know, a glass is a glass, but even duality can't really easily impose a value judgment on this, or this is a good glass or bad glass, you know. But everything is still colored by this. And when I had stepped outside of my outer mind, there was no coloring. But I also started realizing that this experience of pure awareness, yes, it shows me that my normal state of consciousness is biased. It's colored. But it didn't really help me relate to the world. And you actually see, if you look at spiritual people, you can see that for thousands of years, especially in the East, they've had this, but even in the West to some degree, they've had this ideal that a really spiritual person withdraws from the world, sits in a cave or monastery, and meditates on God all day. I'm not saying this can't be okay for some people to do this, but I'm just saying this has been the ideal. And as I've said before, I believe that in the Aquarian age, this ideal is outdated. Because as spiritual people in the Aquarian age, we need to engage with society. So the question is, how do we engage with society? We have to find a way that is not dualistic, not the relative judgments, but where we can still say certain things. Because you see what I said earlier, the implication that many people have, or the interpretation that many people have is, you are hearing a non-dual teaching. You are hearing this, only the undifferentiated is real, but differentiation is duality. So you are saying there can't be any judgments then. There can't be any distinctions. There can't be any discernment between what's real and unreal. In other words, there's no point in looking at the world and saying, well, this is real and this is not real. Because it's all unreal, it's all an illusion. You just need to get away from it. But as I said, this doesn't help you. First of all, it doesn't help you play a positive part in society, but it doesn't help you either, because it doesn't help you have a life. It helps you sit there and isolate yourself from the world, but it doesn't help you be in the world and have a life in the world. And what if you have children and obligations and career and this and that? What if you actually want to do something positive to improve society and help other people? So what I realized eventually was that beyond the pure experience, where you experience yourself as pure awareness or as a silent witness, there are higher spiritual experiences. And that is, as I started out saying, we have the two states of consciousness. We see ourselves as separate beings, and we can see ourselves as connected beings. And I had, in a sense, probably seen myself as a connected being all of my life, and I think many spiritual people have. But by contemplating duality, I became much more consciously aware of what it means to be connected. Because what are you connected to? The important point in the beginning is you realize, see, most people on earth are completely absorbed in their own minds. They're completely blinded by their own minds. Their minds color everything they see and they don't realize it. Right? This is actually what is meant by Maya. The Buddhist concept of Maya or illusion, or many other spiritual teachers talk about illusion. This is exactly what it means, that everything you see is colored by the dualistic mind, but you don't realize it's colored. You think you're seeing reality either the way it is or the only way to see reality. So now you come to a point, a phase, where you realize there must be an alternative to this. And you realize this because you've experienced that there is another way to look at it. But for a time, like myself, you're confused. You don't really know how to deal with this. And the solution is to become more aware of what am I connected to. Because look at it this way. When people are completely blinded by this perception filter, the dualistic perception filter, this is self-reinforcing. This is self-validating. In other words, it can validate anything you want to believe. It can doubt anything you don't want to believe. So it's self-reinforcing. Right? So you can't really, when you're inside of this, you can't really question it. Now you can hear an outer teacher or teaching who questions it, but really it's not going to resonate with you unless you've had that experience of going outside the perception filter and just experiencing the pure awareness. But when you start consciously realizing I'm a connected being, there is a reality outside of my own mind, and I can experience that reality, I can connect to that reality. Then you can say, what exactly am I connected to? And that's when you can realize that the whole idea that founded many spiritual teachings, that there's only one underlying reality, it actually means that there is one mind that connects everything. We can call it the one mind, we can call it the Christ mind, we can call it the Buddha nature. Again, it's not really that important. But there's one mind that connects everything. Now, you can say, well, why is there one mind? What's the purpose of it? And I've explained this before, especially in my video about how the world was created, but also several of my other non-duality videos. So the bottom line is this, very quick summary for those who haven't seen the other videos. So there is one being, you can call it Brahman, God, or the creator, or source, whatever. There's a being who created the world. But it created the world out of its own substance, out of its own being. So the world is not separated from the creator. The creator is sort of embedded in the world. But this being also created self-aware extensions of itself. That's us. We have this basic self-awareness. I exist. I am. I exist. I realize this. I'm conscious. An amoeba can't say, oh, I exist. I'm an amoeba. A worm can't say, I squirm, therefore I am. But we can say, I'm conscious, therefore I exist. So, this is the basic feature we have. But why did the Creator create us out of its own being? Because the world of form is actually an educational institution for other creators. So the idea is the Creator creates an outside environment. It creates extensions of itself that have a limited sense of awareness. We are out of the Creator's being, but we don't have the full awareness that the Creator has. We have a limited, local, point-like sense of self. But the idea is we can expand our sense of self until we reach the same level of awareness as the Creator. This takes a very long time. Which you can see by seeing how vast the material universe is, and there's a spiritual world beyond that that's even more complex. So in order to have enough experiences of all of this complexity, this takes time. Right? But how do we expand our sense of self? Because we have free will. We can choose. We make a choice, we see the consequences, we see the reaction we get back from the reality simulator of the universe. Then we shift our state of consciousness based on that. And we keep doing that. But as I said, there are two ways to exercise our free will. We can see ourselves as connected beings, which is how we start out, or we can go into this idea that we're separate beings, this illusion that we're separate beings. It's just another kind of experience we can have as a self-aware being. Connected, separate. So the whole purpose of allowing us to go into separation is that we can explore the experiences you can have as a separate being until we've had enough of it. And then we return to our state of connection. And now we say, I don't want to experience myself as a separate being anymore. I want to permanently ascend to the level where I experience myself as a connected being that is one with my source. But we have to consciously choose not to see ourselves as separate beings anymore. And that's why we have to have this, I talk about a reality simulator and say we can have two different experiences. The first experience we have is immersion. We identify ourselves as separate beings, as human beings here on earth. We're separate beings. But then we overcome that by going through the awakening phase, where we begin to question the perception filter that we're separate beings. And we do this by connecting to something outside our own minds, which is what I call the one mind. So in other words, the one mind is a mind that is meant to connect us to our source in a way we can never lose. So that even when we go into denying our connection to our source, even if we go into separation and we go to deeper and deeper levels of separation where we are more and more convinced that we are separate beings and that we are right and we know better than God how the universe works, we can always come back by connecting to the one mind. But you see, the one mind is beyond duality. The one mind is absolutely, completely beyond duality. But it doesn't mean that the one mind doesn't discern. Because of course the one mind discerns. It discerns between what is real, namely the connection to everything, and what is unreal, meaning what is created out of the dualistic mind, out of the separate mind. So in other words, what I'm saying here is, and this is what I came to realize, which was a total revolution in thought for me when I realized this, is that the judgments that you have from duality can very well say, oh, this is real, this is unreal, this is true, this is false, this is good, this is bad, this is of God, this is not of God. They can also say, oh, well, this is clearly the one mind. Everything is one reality. And this is the unreal mind. So when you start hearing about these concepts, all that is all that is, and you start having these experiences of experiencing that you're just a silent witness of the world, you can reason from duality that the highest state of mind to go in is where you have no judgments. No discernment, because you're not differentiating, because as I said, everything is an illusion. Everything in differentiation is duality, it's an illusion you have to get away from. But when you begin to understand what I just explained about the one mind, when you begin to connect to the one mind, you realize this was just duality. All that is all that is. Doesn't mean that everything in the world is an illusion. and that you can't make any discernments that are real. In duality, you make discernments, or rather discriminations, that are relative, because they are relative to a standard you have defined in the separate mind. But when you connect to the Christ mind, you can discern between what's real and unreal. But your discernment is not based on a relative standard. It's based on the standard of the one mind that sees that everything is one. Everything, but it doesn't mean that everything is the same, everything is non-differentiated. It means that all the differentiation came out of the Creator's being. So it's again, like I've said before, you have this saying, only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion, the world is Brahman. But it's not even completely accurate, because it would be more accurate to say that everything started with the one being. Everything in the differentiated world is created out of the one being. Therefore, the world is not an illusion. The illusion is that the world is separated from the Creator, is other than the Creator, is different from the Creator. So the world is an expression of the Creator. The world is not an illusion. There is a world out there, created by the Creator, or rather by beings in a higher level of consciousness than we are. The world is not created by our minds. It's what we see in duality is a filter created by our minds. But it doesn't mean the world is there. It's again, there is a glass here. But if I say, oh, I don't really like that glass, I don't like the shape of it, it's ugly, it's an ugly state, that's duality. Or if I say, oh, that's a beautiful glass, I really like it, also duality. But if I say, it's just a glass, well, that's not dualistic. So again, when you connect to the one mind, you can begin to see what duality is. You can begin to see how relative the truth of duality is, any truth defined in duality is. You can begin to see what are the consequences of this truth. And for example, you can say, does a particular idea, does it serve to keep people trapped in duality or make them even more trapped in duality? Does it validate the illusion that they are separate beings? Or does it challenge that illusion and help them escape the suffering that is inevitable in duality? As I said, there's always an opposite in duality. That's why you can only suffer. You're always threatened. So this gives you another way of evaluating everything. And that means that instead of thinking that as a spiritual person, you have to withdraw from the world, you have to be silent, you have to not express any opinions about what's going on in the world, you can actually comment on what's going on in the world. But you are doing it from this sense of being connected, wanting to liberate people from the illusion of duality. And because you realize what duality is, you know what you're liberating them from. Because you see, when you're in duality, you can also have this concept. I mean, I had that for the first many years after I found the spiritual path, and I've seen so many spiritual people have it. Many people still have it. And it's this. Yes, everybody is in an illusion. They need to be awakened from the illusion. The only way to do that is through my spiritual teaching. My guru is the highest guru. He's the only one who can awaken them. That's duality. Even saying non-duality is the highest spiritual teaching. It's the only way to awaken people from duality. Even that's duality. But you can come to a point where you are just, first of all, let's put it this way. When you are in duality, you are seeking to validate your worldview by getting other people to agree with it. And the thinking of the ego is, if everybody on earth agrees with me, I'm right. Absolutely right. But you're not. Because it doesn't matter if everybody on earth agrees with you, if you're out of touch with the reality of the one mind. It doesn't matter. Because you will still be trapped in duality. In fact, as long as you think you're right, you are trapped in duality. So there comes a point where you can start questioning. It's like, let me step back a little bit, because what I realized for myself was, when I was still trapped in this dualistic view, I was always seeking validation, because my ego was so afraid of being proven wrong. So this was the filter I was applying. And there came a point where I saw this, and I started to question it, challenge it. And I realized that when I'm connected to the one mind, I don't feel threatened by other people disagreeing with me. But this doesn't mean that I don't care, or that I don't care about other people, or I don't want to say anything. Right? I had a brief period where I went through this. I don't want to say anything because people can't understand it anyway. But you can come to a deeper sense of connection where you realize that your goal is no longer to validate one particular idea or belief. But you're still looking at, are people trapped in duality? And what could potentially help them start to question duality? It doesn't mean they have to accept an outer teaching. It just means that perhaps you can say something to a person that questions their sense of duality. And in yourself, what happens is, it's like, you come to a point on the spiritual path where you're beginning to question your perception and duality, and you might become open to a non-dual teaching. But you're still seeking to validate your ego's worldview. You're looking for validation. You're coming from a deficit. But when you increase your sense of connection to the one mind beyond the critical level, you shift. You no longer need validation from any source on earth, because you have the validation of your experience of connection, oneness with the one mind, with your higher self, with the beings who have already united with the one mind, which are called ascended masters. So in other words, while you're still partially colored by separation, you still have this deficit. You seek validation in this world horizontally. But as you increase your connection, you no longer need the validation horizontally, because you realize that by increasing your connection, you can get it from above. And that shifts your entire focus, where you are saying, but having this experience of pure awareness, where I'm just the silent witness, was not the highest possible experience. It's not the ultimate experience. It's not really what I want to stay in indefinitely. I want to connect to who I really am, to the one mind. And then you can begin to explore, what does that mean? And I very quickly, there's a saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So in other words, when you are ready to increase your sense of connection, you will receive some kind of impulse, some kind of teaching on what can you connect to. And it's probably why you're watching this video to this point. And so what I realized is that, first of all, my experience of pure awareness proved to me there's a part of me that's independent of the outer mind. That was the first step. But what is that part? Is it just existing on its own? And I very quickly realized or experienced that it isn't. It's connected to something. And that's what I call my higher self or spiritual self, or the I am presence. And the I am presence exists in a higher level of vibration, the spiritual realm. And it has an individuality. It's not nothing. It's not undifferentiated. It has a distinct individuality. So what I realized was, there's two ways to talk about individuality. Yes, all of my life and over many past lifetimes, I built the outer individuality. My identity, mental and emotional bodies. And a lot of it was affected by the world. My nationality, my sex, my race, religion, so forth. But this is not who I am. I am not that outer personality. That's what I experienced. But then I realized, this doesn't mean I'm not a differentiated being. It doesn't mean I'm a no-self. It doesn't mean I'm nothing. No, I have an individuality. But it's a spiritual individuality that exists in the spiritual realm. So the goal is not to stop being a differentiated being and return to nothingness or pure awareness or whatever you call it, or the Atman. My goal is actually, as I explained, to expand my sense of self, the sense of self that's in the I am presence, to higher and higher levels until I eventually reach the greater consciousness. But I also started experiencing that my I am presence is not alone up there in the spiritual realm. There are many beings in the spiritual realm, and some of those beings have been in embodiment on earth like I am, but they have passed the final exam on earth. They have ascended from earth. And they did this by mastering their own minds, by discerning between the false outer individuality, the dualistic individuality, the separate individuality, and the true spiritual individuality, realizing who they are. It could be called self-awareness or self-mastery. And because they had mastered their own minds, they could ascend from earth, and that's why I call them, or they call themselves, ascended masters. And this was revolutionary for me. Because, as I've explained before, when I was in my early 20s, I participated in a meditation course in Switzerland for 4 months, and we had some Vedic teachings, and we did some advanced meditation techniques. And I had a lot of these non-dual experiences. But the context that I was given was this typical Eastern teaching that there's the undifferentiated Brahman. You came out of that, you have millions of incarnations here on earth where you suffer, and then you return to nothingness. And I just intuitively knew this can't be the whole story. There's got to be more to this. And it was not until I found the Center Master teachings I realized, yes, there is more. But then it still took me a while before I started really connecting to the Ascended Masters and to my higher self. So all I'm trying to say here with this is the idea that all it is all it is. It's not the ultimate realization of reality. It's a stepping stone. So in other words, you are in the dualistic mind where you judge everything. You have value judgments about everything. Right, wrong, good or bad, this should happen, this shouldn't happen. The conscious you now steps outside of that outer personality. It experiences itself as pure awareness. I'm not that outer personality. I don't really have these opinions that the outer personality has. I can actually just observe the world neutrally. Spade is a spade. It doesn't have to be good or bad. So that's the experience of. You are experiencing. Let's put it this way: when you're in duality, everything has to have some kind of meaning, some kind of label, some kind of coloring. It has to be on a scale of right and wrong, good and bad. Everything is on a scale. You're constantly judging, evaluating, labeling everything. This shouldn't be happening. This is good. This is bad. These people are wrong. I'm right. But when you have that experience of stepping outside of that and experiencing pure awareness, you're experiencing none of that is actually real. It's just not real. It's all make-believe. And you are not bound by it. You are not defined by it. This is the value of this experience is, I am not defined by my outer personality. I am not defined by anything on earth because I'm a spiritual being that came from a higher realm, descended here to earth, but I haven't become the outer personality I've created. I just created that in response to being alive on a planet like Earth. But I am more than that. I am really not that. So that's what it means. You can actually experience the world without having the dualistic judgments. And that's where you are just saying, well, this is just what is. It's beyond, there's no dualistic judgment. But then as you become more anchored in that experience, you realize, yeah, but there are certain things going on here on this planet. And you begin to see that there are many things happening on this planet precisely because people are trapped in this sense that they are separate beings. And therefore, they can do whatever they want to other people. They don't need to have empathy for other people. They don't need to consider how they are hurting other people. But more than that, they don't realize that if they hurt others, they're hurting themselves because we're all connected. And you begin to realize that people who are in this state of mind, as I said, this state of mind is self-validating. Very hard to get out of. In fact, You can't get out of it when you are inside of it. So how have people traditionally gotten out of it? Well, first of all, by having the experience of stepping outside of it, but also in many cases, because there was somebody who acted as a teacher who came and said, you know, there's an alternative to all this suffering. That's why, historically, there have been spiritual teachers. The Buddha, Jesus, the Vedic seers, those in the Advaita Vedanta tradition. Throughout the ages, been many, many valid gurus who have come with a valid teaching to seek to help people rise to a higher understanding. Not necessarily ultimate, but rise to start to liberate themselves from this dualistic maya and illusion. And that's why there comes a point where when you start integrating with the one mind, you are starting to realize, oh, but I'm not separate from all these people. So it's actually not realistic that I can withdraw into a cave in the Himalayas and I can meditate on God and feel in bliss, and I can completely ignore that the rest of the world is suffering. Because if we're all connected, if I'm connected to all these people that are suffering, their suffering is in a sense my suffering, even though I'm not experiencing it from the inside anymore. I'm not identified with it. You can come to a point where you're not personally suffering. But if you're still only focused on yourself and your own experience of bliss and oneness and non-duality and this and that, you haven't connected to the one mind. So there comes a point where you have the connection where you realize that as long as you are in embodiment on earth, and you can ascend, as I said, and it's your right to do that and say, I don't want to embody on earth anymore. But as long as you're in embodiment, can you just sit there and meditate? Or are you now at a level where the natural thing to do is to go out and express yourself in ways that can hopefully help other people? And there's a certain, if you think about it, there's a certain cognitive dissonance. You have this long tradition in India of gurus. The Vedic seers thousands of years ago, rishis, they see what normally they don't see. What do they see? They saw beyond duality. They connected. How did they see? Because they were so smart? No, because they connected to the one mind. They didn't call it the one mind, they didn't call it ascended masters, but they connected to something beyond duality. And now you have this long tradition of these gurus that have connected to the one mind and have tried to express it in words in ways that help others. So you see what I'm saying? If it was true that all that is just all that is, and that we just need to get away from differentiation as an individual, because I don't need to worry about others. If that was all true, why have all these gurus come? Why have the gurus come? Why didn't they just say, oh, I'm free now, leave the others alone, let them fend for themselves? Because when you are connected, you naturally want to help others. Get free of duality, overcome suffering, connect to the one mind. Because you experience it, you have a better life experience than you had before you were connected, and why wouldn't other people have the same? But you're not coming from the deficit, you want them to validate you. You see, so it gives you a totally different way of evaluating what's happening on earth. And that's why you can come in and say, well, there are certain things happening on this planet that are only going to increase the suffering, only serve to keep people trapped in suffering. But there's an alternative to all of this, and here is the alternative. However you see fit to do it. And this is the importance of it, that many people do this. Because the whole old idea that there's only one true guru is again obsolete in the age of Aquarius. In the age of Aquarius, there are going to be many examples. As I've said before, the age of Pisces was the age of gurus. The age of Aquarius is the age of examples. Because I've had a certain experience in this lifetime. That means I can relate to people who had somewhat similar experience. But I have, over the many years I've been on a spiritual path and giving spiritual teachings, I've had people come to me. They had a very, very difficult childhood that's way beyond what I experienced. And it's not that I can't help them a little bit, but I can't relate to them the same way. I can't say, I know exactly how you feel, I had the same experience, because I didn't. But maybe you did. And that means that when you connect to the one mind, start overcoming your own suffering, then you can reach these people that other teachers can't reach. That's why we are all needed in our own way. But see, we have to come to that point where we connect to the one mind, instead of coming from this separate mind where we want validation that everybody should agree with us and think what we're thinking. That's why we have to give up this illusion that there's only one true teaching, or there's the highest teaching, or this and that. So, there's just one more thing I want to say here. The idea that all that is all that is implies that reality is, as I said, the undifferentiated. Reality is still stand. This was, again, as I said, when I was young and I got this meditation course, it was this. There is the undifferentiated, there's still stand, there's no movement. Out of that comes the world that is in movement. But the goal of the world is to return to nothingness. The reality is, see, this is dualistic. I exist, therefore I suffer. Therefore, suffering is called by my existence. The way to avoid suffering is to go back into no-self, non-existence. No. Suffering is caused by the illusion that I'm a separate being. And therefore, the goal is to overcome that. But as I said, even beyond that, the goal is to expand our sense of self till we reach the Creator consciousness. And we do that not just by passively experiencing the world that the Creator, or rather the Ascended Masters, have created. We do it by co-creating the world. We are designed to be co-creators. We have the same creative abilities as the Creator. We have self-awareness. We have imagination. We can imagine something that is not there now. An architect can imagine a house that is not physically there. He can imagine a house that's different from any other house. And he can build it. But we can create something with our minds that we haven't seen. I talk about it in many of my videos, including how the world was created, that the limitations and the misery and the poverty and the suffering you see on earth is actually created by human beings by going into separation and duality. But this isn't the original design. This isn't natural. Because Earth is an unnatural planet. But it can return to becoming a natural planet where there isn't the suffering. But it can only return if there are enough people who go out and say there's an alternative to duality and separation. But anyway, in the long run, the point is that we, who are self-aware extensions of the greatest being, we are meant to be co-creators and help co-create the world and raise it to higher and higher levels. Again, I explained this and how the world was created. So what I'm saying is, there is a false movement in duality where the ego, because of its existential insecurity, is seeking to create an ultimate state in this world. It's always moving towards something ultimate. That's false. That can eat up your life for lifetimes. Most people have their entire lives eaten up by this. But there's an alternative to that, and that is to connect to the one mind. But when you connect to the one mind, you realize the one mind is not standing still. It's not undifferentiated. It has a clear direction and movement up. You can say, as some people have, some mystics have said, they experience themselves connected to the Creator. Being an extension of the Creator, actually being the Creator, experiencing its creation from the inside. But more than just experiencing, we're also co-creating. So that means the one mind, as I said, it's the mind that unifies us with our source. And therefore, the one mind, it pulls us back towards the Creator consciousness where we can experience not only connection to our source, but oneness with our source. But still be a differentiated being, an individual being. So oneness with our source does not mean we disappear. It means we reach the same level so we fully appreciate what our source is. And the one mind is what gives us that desire for something more. I mean, if you think about it, why were you attracted to a non-dual teaching or a spiritual teaching? Some sense that there's got to be more to know, understand about life. There's got to be more to experience. And that drive to be more is our fundamental drive that pulls us back to oneness with our source. It's not pulling us back to nothingness or stillstand. It's pulling us towards ever higher expressions of self, self-transcendence. And that's why, you see these videos, people who say, I followed these non-dual teachings for years, and suddenly I realized I was depressed. I was suicidal. I didn't want to live anymore. Well, that's because if you interpret the non-dual teachings a certain way, you're going against your own fundamental nature, which is you want to transcend yourself and reach higher levels of self-awareness. That's the basic drive in your being. Instead, you're trying to force yourself to go towards a state of non-self, non-differentiation, nothing matters. Well, no wonder you're depressed if nothing matters to you, for God's sake. How hard is that to figure out? So I'm just saying here, what I'm trying to say is, you can evaluate everything based on duality, where everything must have an opposite. Or you can evaluate everything based on the one mind that only looks at what keeps you trapped in duality, what helps you escape duality, so you can reach higher levels of awareness. And the idea that you're supposed to return to nothingness and have no self, it's just a product of the dualistic mind. It's an illusion, complete illusion. And you will be able to sense this. Just center in your heart and see, isn't there something that resonates with this? I'm not supposed to return to nothingness. I'm supposed to transcend and reach a higher level of awareness instead of no awareness. Well, if you sense that, that's your answer. If you don't, then say, this guy is nuts, he doesn't understand what duality is about, and ignore me. And find a teacher that validates what you want to believe.